Valley AC in Waterford placed third in 34.58. Circa Nireen was one of the 20,000 women who took part. She explains why she's running the race for the first time today.
I'm very grateful to be part of such an amazing event. Like, it's a little bit emotional to be surrounded by so many women. Like, so many people are telling their stories, fundraising for great causes, you know, maybe running for a parent who passed away or had breast cancer or something. So yeah, and I guess I'm doing it for myself as well. So I had cancer 4 years ago, so it's emotional for myself as well, and you know, to be able to do this.
And that's your news at 2 minutes past 2.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Bin the Father's Day socks. Give Dad a Ryanair gift card from his number one baby.
Another dry and sunny day with just the odd shower in Ulster later this afternoon. Highs of 19 to 24 degrees. But now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Hello and welcome back to Off the Ball. I'm Kathleen McNamee and I'm here to take you through the day's sport. And I am now very lucky to be joined for the Sunday paper review by Irish Independent columnist Roy Curtis and Irish Daily Mail sports editor Orla McElroy. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey Kathleen.
I think we were getting half the conversations we're hopefully going to have on air over the next little while during the ad break in the news there. Lots of stories across the papers today. Unsurprisingly, leading most of the front pages is that win for Manchester City against Manchester United. The Sunday Times have gone with seeing double. Manchester City one match from treble as Gundogan scores twice to steal FA Cup win. The Observer has 2 down, 1 to go. Actually, Sunday Independent is kind of one of the few things that does have Manchester City on the front page, but the big picture on it is Clifford's rebel yell, champions get back to winning ways, and an image of David Clifford celebrating after scoring a controversial penalty yesterday in their win against Cork. We were hearing from both managers there a little bit earlier on. The Sunday Mirror Sport, Gunstoppable after Ilkay Gundogan's 2 goals there. The Sun Sport, Gun 2-3. Pep, only the treble can make us complete, and a picture of an emotional Pep Guardiola. I was saying earlier to the lads, I was kind of surprised at how emotional Guardiola was after yesterday. I thought he would be kind of saving up those emotions for next week in the Champions League when they actually get the treble, if they do manage to beat Inter Milan.
I think maybe the pressure cooker's building up and he needed to let some stuff out ahead of next week. He'll be an interesting case study, I'd say, over the next 5 or 6 days.
Oh yeah, definitely. There is a tomb to be written about him someday, and I hope someone gets it and they're able to like properly interview him and the people around him about these years, because it'd be amazing to know what's been going on in his brain. Here we have the Irish Mail on Sunday. 1 more to go, Haaland. So that was Haaland saying yesterday that they still had 1 more to go. He was cheering that into the crowd after the win. And the Sunday World Sport, Top Gun, there may be treble ahead as Gundogan's brace fires City to FA Cup glory against old rivals. I think that one's my favourite out of all of them.
It's very good.
We might as well start with just a little bit of chat around that, since it is dominating all the back pages. There's a bit of a assumption at this stage that the treble is going to happen, but as John Duggan was pointing out earlier, you know, there is still a match to be played, and with City's record in the Champions League, it's hard to know, you know, will they actually be able to deal with the mental pressure, like you were saying, with Pep Guardiola letting go a bit of those emotions. What would it mean for the City team to, I suppose, get that final notch that they need?
I think it's a defining week for Guardiola. Obviously, it's been well documented that he hasn't won a Champions League without Messi, despite having extraordinary resources at both Munich and Manchester. And he has, until this week, or this last couple of weeks, always stepped away from the significance of the Champions League and pointed out that they'd won so many league titles, so many FA Cups, that their legacy was secure, regardless of what happened in Europe. But he changed his tone yesterday in the aftermath of the game. It was really, really interesting, where he said, we have to win this. These guys will never get the credit they deserve as a team unless we win this. And it's almost like he was tortured in the past. He made tactical changes that seemed illogical, a genius overthinking almost. That he looks like he's taken a more straightforward approach to this and saying, I'm going to put the best team I have out there. I'm not going to come up with any wild tactics. And if we perform, we'll win, and we need to win. He's saying the players should feel pressure. It's logical to feel pressure because this is the defining moment. And if you look at the way they've played recently, particularly the way they dismantled Real Madrid, it's really difficult to see them not winning next week.
Yeah, it is. And especially, like, as you say, that every other time Guardiola has gotten to this stage, you're looking at the team he's putting out or the formations he's doing, and you're like, did he disappear for a while and someone else took over? Because it just doesn't seem to make any sense. And I think with the momentum that they've had in the final couple of games in the season, and also that FA Cup yesterday, like, I do think there was a part of Guardiola somewhere who saw the fact that, yes, Manchester United are nowhere near the class of City, but the whole idea of that Erik ten Hag was going to be able to say to them, well, like, look, you don't want City matching your record, you don't want them taking that, and then also we're one of the final things that can stop Guardiola getting this big treble that is the defining moment of his career. I can kind of understand how maybe in Guardiola's head that, you know, yesterday was more of a stumbling block to achieving his hopes and dreams than maybe next weekend might be.
Like, yesterday is just become a means to an end. It's almost not about the trophy. Nobody kind of worried about the trophy. United wanted to win it because they wanted to stop the treble, and City wanted to win it because it's just number 2 and now we can move on to number 3. And I love, like, they've absolutely dropped all pretense of, you know, we're not worried about this and, you know, it's just about the process or anything like that. It's literally, you know, if we don't do it, we're missing something forever. You know, that's what it's all about. We've done incredible seasons, but we have to win the Champions League to be recognised like the team deserves to be recognised. As Roy said, he knows that's what it's all about. And the pressure is going to be immense. Incredible. You can't imagine how bad it's going to be this week.
Isn't it extraordinary in a time of PR spin where every potential bomb is diffused in advance, anything that might stir controversy, that Guardiola is walking head on into this and saying, this storm is coming and we've got to be able to deal with it. And I really think he's learned from his own behaviour in the past that trying to distract from it, trying to play it down, clearly hasn't worked. To say to these players, high achievers, huge competitors, this is your moment, go and seize it.
And what's the point in him pretending? What's the point in him putting a bit of thought into how am I going to, you know,
you can't
play
deny
this
it at
down?
this stage because
Exactly.
everyone knows.
Of course not. And it would look ridiculous if he did attempt to try it. So at least he's kind of going, yeah, we know this is all that matters and we're going to give it everything.
Yeah, and he's talked about it for so long as being like defining for him. So if he was to turn around now and be like, oh no, we don't care, we're taking things easy, it's all going to be fine, you'd be like, I wonder what you do in a week like this. Like, you know, you've just won the FA Cup, so obviously you have that little bit of a high and then you have the anticipation going in. You know, I'd love to get into like all the sports psychologists' heads that are working with these City players this week, and, you know, how do you approach maybe like a Haaland compared to a Jack Grealish and adjusting what those players need. One of the players that is mentioned, of course, across all the pages is Gundogan, after those 2 incredible strikes yesterday from him. 12 seconds in for the first goal, which is the fastest ever goal. I hadn't even sat down by the time this goal was scored. And between that and the Women's Champions League as well, which also had a goal in the opening couple of minutes, I was like, I'm in for a goal fest. I don't know which one I'm supposed to be paying more attention to. But yeah, Gundogan, he's an interesting one because he's been so pivotal to City this season, but there's still that question mark over his future. And, you know, Pep said yesterday that, you know, they're trying their best to hold on to him. Rumours are that he's going to go to Barcelona if he can't sort things out with City, but he was the hero yesterday. He's
a very atypical superstar. Barney Ronay, Guardian Observer writer who has a magnificent turn of phrase, spoke about Gundogan's contribution generally. I actually just took down a couple of notes. He said they completed the double here with a couple of moments of routine mid-30s brilliance from a footballer who looks less like a visitor from the footballing future, more like a cuddly pirate. Footballers don't generally look like this. Footballers are snake-hipped super athletes, all tensile strength and elite power to weight ratios. Gundogan is small and slightly rotund. He doesn't have a football haircut or a footballer's look of fierce, hungry focus. He seems to be thinking about things, scurries about the place like the old family Labrador who knows how to open the back door and bring you your favourite jumper when you feel bad. I think it's an absolutely magnificent description. But he is clearly a cerebral player rather than athletic player. And Guardiola spoke yesterday about they've lived as neighbours. He was Guardiola's first signing and they've lived as neighbours for 7 years, and it was remarkable to hear Guardiola describe him as a very good friend. You don't normally hear that in a relationship between manager
especially
and
at this
player.
stage, you know, sometimes exactly. It comes out afterwards, but at this stage
and I think they've all talked about him as a future coach, the latest following in the Arteta line to work with Guardiola and then move to the sideline. And I think there's still a possibility he might stay if he's given an extension on his contract, but it's sort of policy to maybe only offer a year. And if he won the Champions League, stepping away to Barcelona might be the next move. But he's never been one of the guys that you first focus on. But then when you look back at the body of City's work, he's always a key figure. And if you look at guys that didn't even get on the pitch yesterday, like Riyad Mahrez, an absolutely magnificent player. And I know they're not like for like players, but Gundogan is always in the side for the big games, and I think that as much as anything speaks of his absolute central importance to everything they've achieved.
I'd actually forgotten that he was Guardiola's first signing when he arrived, that he'd actually been there for the entire Guardiola project until I was reading about it in the papers today. And as you say, like, he's just a name that's always there, even if it is the sort of game where maybe City can afford to relax some of their players. He still seems pretty central to the way they set up and the way that they play.
And somebody who's probably, like, he's that type of player who's appreciated more looking back, really, isn't he?
Very much.
Than you do at the time. So
yeah, but that's the thing, you kind of think that there would be a massive cohort of City fans that should he leave this summer, and he said it does look pretty likely that that's going to happen, will have wanted to have given him maybe a proper send off, and the only way they can really do that now is if they win the Champions League, because obviously then they'll have their open top buses, and I don't know, Pep will be out cheering and throwing things into the crowd as we've seen him done in other times, whereas they're not going to do that this week with the FA Cup because they have such a big thing to come. In terms of like a player like that, obviously we've seen City and they're so good at recruitment, and obviously they have the money to be so good at recruitment, but the fact that you can't come to some sort of agreement with a player who has given so much to the club and who has been such a regular, you're not talking about someone that Guardiola is putting out to pasture by any means. Is it not worth fighting a bit harder than City seem to have been for the player?
You would think it is entirely. He's shown himself to be so pivotal. He scored 2 as well in the league deciding game. He's a central figure. He's Guardiola's primary lieutenant on the pitch, almost Guardiola's brains on the pitch. De Bruyne is a beautiful, creative, powerful footballer, and Haaland obviously is this Norse divinity, but Gundogan is the guy, the glue almost, who keeps everything together. Money is obviously no object. City have bought the Premier League, bought their dominance. No one can hide from that fact. I still find them hugely attractive to watch, understanding the sports washing and despising what it stands for. The actual aesthetic on the pitch, you can't but enjoy it if you like football. You can despair at what it represents. And Gundogan, I think, is a really central player in that. Some players, ones who don't often make headlines, their greatness is only appreciated after they go. And I think he'd be a really difficult player, even with their wealth, for them to replace. Players like that, like Casemiro when he came to Manchester United, their football intelligence, their understanding of what's required to make a team tick and make those around them better, is a very understated asset in a time when we really sort of herald the spectacular. He is the glue.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that, like, as much as you can buy players and buy the best young talent, someone with the experience of Gundogan in a team like City, who's been there for 7 years, who's seen everyone come through the doors, who's like adjusted his play to players like Haaland coming in and what he requires, or if it's like a Jack Grealish or whoever it is, you also do need that stability in a team, as well as the constant turn off of the biggest and the brightest, which kind of leads quite well into the other thing that's in most of the papers today, as well as talking about City and if they're going to do the treble, is Manchester United and where they are after yesterday. And I suppose, a couple of people writing in the papers that United don't really have to be ashamed of their performance yesterday. They probably did all they could, but when you saw the likes of, Weghorst coming on and like Jadon Sancho going off, who was completely invisible for most of the match, once again, it's hard to see him sticking around Manchester United for much longer. And then the options that City had to come off the bench, they're just nowhere near the same place. Yeah,
and you can talk about, Roy alluded to it with the discussion of, City's the charges and where they are financially and how they've got to this place. And actually, that's an interesting point about the papers, is there's not much discussion. In comparison to the Premier League win, there was a lot more mention then of the charges that City were facing in comparison to what's there now. Today it
was barely mentioned in most of the pieces that I read.
I haven't seen much mention of it at all, and it's it is, as you said, acclaiming the performance. But you look at these player ratings here in front of me, you see United are littered with 4s and 5s, and City are up with 7s and 8s, and
Do you think that's a failure of our journalism, that every single paper today has pretty extensive coverage of it, but it's not even a footnote really?
Yeah, I think there has obviously been a lot of coverage of. I think probably in the immediacy of that fixture, it may not have featured as much. I suspect it will become a very dominant team in the days ahead, both in the build-up to the Champions League, and particularly if they win and emulate United's treble. The fact that a sports washing project is in danger of reducing the Premier League to just the plaything of a super wealthy club. When you mentioned there the talk of what this means for Manchester United, I think it must be infinitely depressing for them to know that they probably have the right manager at last. They have made some really good, significant signings. They have Rashford playing like a world star, and they are not in the same postcode as City, and they're not going to be. I know some people will react to that and say, well, it takes time. Guardiola's been there 7 years. It took Klopp a number of years before his project came to fruition. I think United will continue to improve. I think Ten Hag has shown himself a manager of substance, but City's infinite resources just raised the bar to a point that the miracle was that Liverpool were able to go with them for so long. And you wonder now, I suppose the one hope for United, for Liverpool, for Arsenal, for anybody else hoping to compete, is that Guardiola will move on. Maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years. I think his contract's 2 more years. But for so long as he stays there, and for so long as they have state backing, they're going to be invincible.
That's a point. Henry Winter makes that point. United need 3 transfer windows to catch up, to even catch up to where City are now. And then he also makes a point further on, that while Ten Hag looks definitely like the right guy, there's an element of uncertainty there with the ownership of the club. So if you don't know who owns the club, how much money you have available, how do you set up an investment strategy and a strategy whereby I'm sure all these clubs plan 3 and 4 transfer windows in advance. They're not just planning for the next one. So how do you set that strategy in place if you don't know who's going to own the club or what kind of funds you're going to have available?
Exactly. It's impossible.
So does that set them further back on the road to trying to catch up with City?
Absolutely. I don't want to paint it as a bleak picture. As I say, I really adore watching City play. But at the same time, the notion of competition is inherent to competition. And that's why we were sort of thankful to Klopp and Liverpool for so many years, for maybe disguising the reality of how great City's resources were by serial overachievement on Liverpool's behalf. We saw it at the start of this season with Arsenal, and most neutrals attached themselves to Arsenal just because they represented hope, I think. And if you look at what PSG have done in France, they're just going to win the league. If you look at how Scottish football has been diminished, Rangers had a period of dominance and it's old firm, but at the start of the season that it's not a true competition. And the Premier League's one strength, the one calling card has always been this team can win, this team could. They overplay and maybe the most competitive league in the world, but there was truth to the fact that lower teams regularly beat higher teams, and the title was questionable at the very least. But City's dominance just doesn't look. It's a vice grip that's going to be very hard for any other team to loosen, I think.
Yeah, I remember during COVID, and it was like a Zoom Christmas party, which, those fun things that we used to have to do. And to make it more entertaining for ourselves, we did a bit of a quiz, and I was working over at ESPN at the time. And one of the ones was could you name every single winner of the league since it started up? And it was funny because the years that City won it were the years that everyone really struggled to remember that it was City, because they they could remember what happened in the top four. They can remember who was relegated. If there was like a team that did particularly well and kind of finished a bit higher up the table than we could, all that, who won it. And every time we got to that point, we were like, it has to be City. And it was always City, because as beautiful as the football is and as amazing as it is to watch someone like Haaland banging goal after goal, it's becoming unremarkable, which sounds stupid to say, but it kind of is.
That is what happens in any walk of life. I'm well known as a Dublin football fan, and I remember the euphoric feeling in 2011. Just this, one of the great days of your life, when they won after 16 years, and they went on to win 8 All-Irelands and win 6 in a row. And with the best will in the world, you can't, even as a fan of those teams, get the same level of joy. So obviously for a neutral, seeing a team win again and again, whether it's City or whether it's Dublin, your natural calling is to say, is there anyone who can come in and take them on?
Well, at the moment it doesn't seem like there's too many. Arsenal have made a good try of it this year, but I also
seems to take so much out of teams. That's the thing. It's like it's a monumental effort for like what Liverpool did for as long as they did. Yeah. It was a monumental effort to get there, and then that seems to really tell on a team. Like look at what Leicester did to win, and then where they come back to. How is it going to affect Arsenal to have done as much as they did for as long as they did? So can anybody keep that up in a sustained manner? Not unless you're Man City.
To take on City, you've got to be running at 100-metre pace over 5,000 metres, and you just think that's not sustainable.
Yeah, I know. There's one of the things I thought maybe might change the things this year in terms of City was to having the World Cup in the middle of the season, and obviously having so many high-class players, you're going to have a higher amount of them actually competing at the World Cup, and we saw it affect a lot of other teams. Like towards the end of the season, players just look like they're absolutely out on their feet. City, they just seem to keep on. They almost got better in the second half and were able to push on, and maybe that is the benefit of having any of their bench is probably pretty close to a starting 11 player in every other team, or at least definitely the top half.
Probably didn't do any harm that Haaland wasn't at the World Cup.
No, probably didn't do any harm. I mean, we could have done with seeing him score a few goals. That would have been interesting, and a few less in the Premier League if you're not a City supporter. So, and it's hard to know Eric Ten Hag, like, where does he go? What's he do now? He clearly needs some sort of money coming into the club so that he can buy the sort of players that they need. Like Rashford's obviously playing really well. You looked at Eriksson, was a really important player and really steadied things at United when they needed that, but he was just absolutely wrecked by the end of the season, which is understandable considering everything he's gone through and the amount of game time he's played as well. They need a few more, I suppose, Casemiro style players to come in that have that gilded edge of just being very, very good at football and also very, very experienced.
Well, they spent a lot of money, questionably. Jadon Sancho, you mentioned a while ago, and he was anonymous yesterday. United have been very compassionate in the way they've dealt with him, and they've tried many things to sort of bring him to a physical and mental peak, but I think there's patience running out now. And I mean, I read a lot of the commentary this morning was that if anybody was likely to make a bid for him this summer, they'd be happy to offload. Other guys like Anthony, like Fred, who a lot of money have been spent on. Okay, Fred has probably had a better season than he had previously, but still he's not remotely at the level you want if you're going to be competing with City on a regular basis. And Anthony is one of these clearly very gifted, if one-footed players, but again, is he an emotional leader? Is he one of those generals who will deliver for you rather than do the flash thing when things are going well? City have so many bases covered that they ask so many questions of you. It's just a non-stop interrogation.
But they were able to play their number 2 goalkeeper, and then you have De Gea not absolutely shining for United, and it shows up the difference and the disparity between the sides, doesn't it?
2 words: Louth Weghorst.
Yeah.
2 goals in 30 games, is it? Yeah, I think so. I think I read that somewhere in the paper today. No, you look at, I suppose, United teams of old and the heroes and the legends that came out of them, and you have to say Rashford will probably make a claim for it, especially if he stays around United for another couple of years, but very, very few players that have come through there in recent years. Ronaldo for a time until it all went absolutely disastrous for them. One of the big things that has dominated the papers today as well is, of course, GA, and there's lots of talk about the games that happened over the weekend, but I suppose a common theme in a lot of the columnists, especially like former footballers talking about it, and general columnists as well, is the fact of, is the GA turning its fans against it by the fact that it's not an entertaining spectacle anymore. Mark O'Shea was writing about it in the Mail on Sunday. Sweeney, Brawley, Spillane all also writing on it, and a few more as well. Found this conversation this week so interesting, and it's funny because quite a lot of the columnists, they all offer, you know, their solutions. So, you know, Mark O'Shea talks about bringing in an offside rule. Brawley is like, get me on that rules committee, I'll change things up. These lads took 3 years to come up with the mark, but I'm going to, you know, revolutionise football in the way you know it, which is a very Brawley way of talking about things. But was there any of the ideas that I suppose were floated that kind of piqued your interest?
From a personal point of view, I suppose it depends. We all view Gaelic football and the championship through different prisms. For me, it's been one of the foundation stones of identity. I mentioned the Dublin fandom, and that came from my dad bringing me as a 7 or 8 year old to see Dublin and Kerry in 1976. So for me, it's always been far more than about the 70 minutes. It's a social and cultural occasion, going to these championship games. And I was with a busload of people who went to Kilkenny for the Dublin-Kildare game yesterday, and we were talking about this, that part of the attraction of going to games has always been you meet friends, you share old stories. But now that's becoming the most important part, because there was a sort of consensus amongst people, and these are all GA loyalists, these are not contrarians, these are people who love the game, who love the occasion, who love the history, that the games are becoming increasingly less compelling, increasingly less electrifying, more formulaic. So I think anything that brought a bit of the more spontaneity rather than a tactical obsession with possession and caution. Philly McMahon, who I love as a columnist, made a compelling case for the modern game in his column in the Indo yesterday. He was talking about, and he's right, that fitness levels and tactical awareness have never been at such an advanced stage. That's all true, and it's fine. But there's still an element of the emperor's clothes if you're telling people that the game is more attractive now, because everyone I talk to, everyone is saying, I'm really struggling to watch the games at times. The laterals passing, the back and forth. Roscommon tactical masterclass last week, and their point after the 5 minutes possession has been much talked about. But it's still, it doesn't get you off the edge of your seat if you're watching. One thing, Eamon Sweeney talks about the 3-point line being introduced in basketball. And one of the joys, I heard James O'Donoghue on News Talk yesterday talking about where are the shooters gone in reference to the Cork and Kerry game. He's saying we ooh and ah about Clifford because he's doing something unique that used to be commonplace. He referenced Cork players like Colin Corkery and Daniel Goulding in the old Cork and Kerry rivalry. I would love to see a 2-point zone in Gaelic football where guys are encouraged to shoot from 45 metres, but maybe have it as the 45 metre line or some sort of arc. That you then reward adventure rather than the endless trying to work the ball inside. That's one I'd like.
Because there's an invisible line where you don't attempt a shot from outside this zone, and that's coached and players are taught that. And you know, what's the percentage success rate from taking your shot from out here? I remember talking to a football manager about this, and he was saying that he's actively encouraging his players to take shots from out there because, well, okay, maybe you've only a 30% chance of success, but nobody's expecting it. So maybe you might draw the defence out. Maybe if you try and do these things rather than sticking to the perceived wisdom of only taking your shot from inside this red zone, maybe you might get a different result, and if you're the team that's prepared to do it, and it always takes something like that, doesn't it, for some team to do something different to change things up. But like, as you said about Eamon Sweeney, Eamon's talking about it, and he's, talking about how people describe games as grimly compelling or like a chess match, and that's not
how you want it to be described.
The game of football. That is not what you want to hear, and it's not what you want to watch. You want to watch, two teams going at each other. There was a bit of it, I thought, at the start of the Dublin-Kildare game yesterday, and it looked like, these two teams are ready to go end to end here. It lasted for about 10 minutes and things settled back to a bit more of a reality, and a routine.
There's an issue where I love Gaelic football as a sport, and yet if you criticise, there's now a tendency to say you're stuck in the past, that you don't understand. There's this intellectualisation of the argument where people who pine for something that's past are sort of Luddites who don't understand the sophisticated nature of the game now. And that has divided people into two camps. And I think that's actually a problem where we can't address. I absolutely understand strength and conditioning. I understand that these are fantastic athletes. I understand that they have skills that maybe weren't there before. They certainly have athleticism that wasn't there before. But still, from a spectator's point of view, what you need for spectacle is drama, adventure, spontaneous eruptions of brilliance, and players not afraid to take risks. As Orla said, a lot of it is coached into players that you just can't do this. You can't do this, and you're killing the individuality. If you applied that to other sports, imagine if we told Messi he couldn't dribble from 70 yards, if we told Steph Curry he couldn't shoot from 30 feet, if we told Tiger Woods he couldn't, or Phil Mickelson, that they couldn't take a shot from the rough and try and go through pine trees to put it on the green at the 13th in Augusta. I think we're coaching an awful lot of the beauty out of the game.
That was something that happened in rugby as well for a few years. You saw an awful lot of structure in the game until, and I'm sure it'll happen, something will happen in Gaelic football and things will change and it'll, evolve as it always does. But you saw it in rugby where there was a lot of structure and players had a certain way of playing and a defined, routine to what they were doing. And then things change again and all of a sudden it becomes a bit more off the cuff. That's exciting. That's what you want to watch. And there was pieces talking about a few pieces looking back at Leinster last weekend and talking about how the Leinster La Rochelle final and the Ireland-France Six Nations game were two outstanding games of rugby this year. And we have evolved from a point where rugby was seen as turgid and 80 minutes of torture watching it because it was so prescribed and everybody was sticking to what they had to do. So you'd hope that maybe they will come up with some ideas. Like one of the ones that Joe Brawley mentions is essentially the backcourt rule of not going past halfway and also kicking out past the 45, which is one that a lot of people have talked about. I was in a discussion about that during the week. That's a really fairly simple one to police as well. You would imagine. Once you get past the halfway or wherever you want to mark it from, that you can't go backwards. But Mark O'Shea's column, he tells a good story about how in training a drill that Paddy used to put them through where players weren't allowed to come back past the 45. So there was, 3 defenders and 3 forwards up there, and he said he got, what was it, Dara was slagging him, he got taken for 2-6 by Gooch in a training drill, and he was distraught and was going home, at the butt of Dara's jokes in the car.
Yeah, he was saying everyone was laughing at him and he couldn't even muster a proper response. So it was a F off was all he could get to. Yeah. But then he said later on, and he was like, Dara saw that his mood wasn't lifted and he came over and he was like, listen, that drill is for your benefit as much as it is for Gooch. Who else is going to be exposed to that on a Tuesday evening? What else will you have to fear after that? He pointed out. Which is like, it's true, Yeah.
Absolutely. And it shows again how fear is the dominant narrative and can dictate how teams approach games. I think it's important to have some perspective. There's still moments of great beauty in Gaelic football. We are witnessing a generational talent, maybe an all-time talent in David Clifford. And myself and Orla were talking outside. It is extraordinary how the pressure washes off the guy. The expectation on him every time he goes out. And he actually exceeds your expectations almost every time. We had the Shane Walsh-Clifford shootout in last year's All-Ireland, which was box office of the highest type. You have players, I was down in Cork when Jack McCaffrey made his comeback for Dublin. and this electrifying moment when he gets the ball for the first time and takes off. So the players are there to perform in a way that would captivate people. But the prevailing culture, as Orla was talking about in rugby, the prevailing culture at the moment is stymieing that creativity. It means that we're seeing players at their athletic best, perhaps at their physical best, but not showcasing their talents and skills.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There's so many different things that we could do. It's like the first time I've actually seen there's about probably 20 different options that have been tabled by people. And we'll look into a few more of those after this short break.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball. Screen Time with John Fardy.
As Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse swings into the cinema, I talk to Oscar winner Daniel Kaluuya about voicing the Spider-Punk. Closer to home, I talk to director Joe Lee about his documentary 406 Days. Plus, I talk to the director of Reality, the movie about the whistleblower who found evidence of Russian interference in the US 2016 election.
Screen Time with John Fardy.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast now on newstalk.com or in the Newstalk app.
Newstalk. Conversation that counts.
Hi, I'm Ken Doherty. For all van drivers and business owners, InsureMyVan.ie is Ireland's low-cost van and commercial insurance specialist. For high-quality van and all commercial insurances, call InsureMyVan.ie.
City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as InsureMyVan.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Think about all the time you spend mowing the lawn. Now, think about all the time you could save. The other things you could do with a Husqvarna auto mower on the job.
It's a robotic lawnmower. I'm not mowing. Husqvarna is.
It's got GPS tracking and an app. Husqvarna even works in the rain. What would I want to be mowing?
4! I've got much better things to do with my time than mow.
Husqvarna auto mower. Never mow again. Learn more at husqvarna.ie.
Is it true you have to finish the course of antibiotics every time?
Is there anything I shouldn't have when I'm taking my medicine?
Do I need to go to the doctor? Or is there an over-the-counter treatment for this?
We all want to make sure we're doing the right thing when looking after ourselves and our family's health. Your local pharmacist can provide quality, expert advice you can trust and advise on medicine to improve your symptoms if needed. Your local community pharmacy, always here for you. Brought to you by the Irish Pharmacy Union. We spend much of our lives waiting. Waiting for someone to talk to.
Thank you for holding.
Waiting in line.
Next.
And waiting for the sun to shine. But if you're holding on for the right EV, your wait is over. Because the Kia EV6 is now waiting for you at your local Kia dealer. A triumph of design, space and range. The award-winning EV6 is the car that changes everything. So what are you waiting for? Visit kia.com to book your test drive. Kia. Movement that inspires.
Kick off June with these brilliant bank holiday offers at Lidl. From June 2nd to June 5th, spend €50 or more and save 10% with Lidl Plus. And fill the grill with 4D-approved barbecue meats, 3 for just €9. Go on, shop without compromise. Go full summer at Lidl. T's and C's apply.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
You're very welcome back to Off the Ball on this Sunday. Kathleen McNamee here, and we are doing our Sunday paper review. And just to give you a bit of a halftime football update, Mayo are they're not 6-4, they're 7-4 up against Louth. There, we were chatting to Cullen Boyle earlier on about that game. So Louth keeping themselves in at the moment. Mayo have mostly been ahead for the game by 2 or 3 points, so they're keeping a healthy distance, and you'd kind of imagine the second half will start and they'll take a bit more distance, but you never know. It's never over until that final whistle. Before the break, we were just chatting about GA and what it needs to do, and Roy, you were saying that you would bring in that if you shoot from the 45-yard line or somewhere equivalent to that, you get 2 points rather than 1. Is there anything, Orla, that you would bring in, considering all the options that there are across the papers today?
Well, I agree with, not often I say it, but I agree with Joe Brolly, where Joe mentions 4 things, 4 rules. Kickouts beyond the 45. The goalkeeper can't accept a pass from an outfield player. The ball can't be played back over the halfway line, and no sweeper. Now, I don't know how you police the no sweeper.
I was curious. I would have liked to have read more about that, because I was like,
I'd definitely like to know how he plans to do that.
Yeah, because it would be like a tactical interpretation by the referee then of what a sweeper is and how they're conducting themselves.
Slightly beyond the remit of the referee, I think. But I definitely think like the kickouts beyond the 45 and the backcourt rule, the no ball being played back over the halfway line would be interesting. And it'd be interesting to maybe trial them for a year and give them a proper go. I think one thing that you might learn looking back at COVID was that, you know, if you do something for a year, it's not the end of the world. We played games in closed stadiums and we did things entirely differently. We had winter championships, we had all sorts of very strange things, so it mightn't be the end of the world to actually try something like that. But that was Joe's pitch for getting on the rules committee. And Mark O'Shea's is we were talking about that you want to keep the number of players beyond the 45 at a certain level, and as you mentioned, the offside rule, and you know, you don't want to see the 15 players behind the ball. And like, for my sins, I watched that spell of Dublin, of the Roscommon possession, and you're just looking at this going, how is this helping anybody? You know, it's not. It's
you're
not
finding yourself just screaming at the TV, just being like, someone shoot, someone do something,
try and move up the pitch. Just don't give it back to the goalkeeper again, or just don't keep going backwards. But you know, do you bring in the backcourt rule, and then do you then need a shot clock, or are you turning it into a different game? You know, maybe that's a step too far. I don't know.
I don't know if a breaking point will be crowd reaction, as in attendance is falling, and ultimately the finances of the GAA are dependent both on people paying through the gates and on sponsors, and sponsors are very and acutely aware of how the market is reacting to their sponsorship. So if you have a situation where attendances are falling, as they have been at some games for sure, that money is the money that ultimately allows county teams to have their level of preparation. And if there's a reaction from the GAA because the monies being generated are diminishing, that forces their hand almost to make changes, to make the game more attractive to people, to get them through the gates.
Yeah, and one thing that came up when I was discussing this with some of my colleagues during the week was the tackle's an issue. You know, the tackle is an issue that needs to be resolved in football, and we need to figure out what's going on. There are times you're looking at a tackle going, well, was that a free or was it not a free? And there's debate about what constitutes a free, what constitutes a tackle. Like, that surely needs to be cleared up and made a bit more clear, because it's not something that can be, surely the idea of sport, it should be easy to explain and coach and teach, and that's not something that makes the game any more attractive.
Yeah, I am glad that like the stuff in the papers this weekend has moved on a little bit from the whole narrative where it felt like people were almost giving off to Roscommon for how they played, and you're like, they're going out to win. Of course they're going to do whatever they can do. If it's terrible football,
it was a tactical masterclass. There's no question about that. And in fact, if you look at what's happening now, we should actually be excited about the football championship. Orla and myself were talking outside. I never recall a year where you can make a compelling case for any one of 5 or 6 teams, simply because no team is stepping ahead. Clifford is keeping Kerry above water, it seems. Dublin are largely living on muscle memory. Mayo and Galway have probably been visually the best sides so far. Roscommon at 33-1 for the All-Ireland, and yet it would not be sensational if they were to reach a final. We're seeing Westmeath win games, we're seeing Cork push Kerry, and yet we're looking at headlines, as in the piece, Eamon's piece, football is in danger of death by boredom. No one goes to matches hoping to see blanket defence. It's indicative of where our mindset is around the game now. There's just this negativity that has taken hold, both of the tactics and our perception of the game at the moment, where hurling is getting all the positive publicity. Football's the dirt on the shoe at the moment for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, hurling's getting a lot of positive publicity, but there's also a lot of talk about rule changes there as well, and people, probably it's less so rule changes, I suppose it's more like structural changes to the way the competition is actually run, because you're getting these insane games and actually because the hurling scores have been so high, it probably makes the football scores being that bit lower even more obvious.
Yeah, definitely. And you look at, like, I was watching Limerick last weekend, there was 60 plus scores in that game. I mean, it's an accounting exercise just to keep track of what's going on in the game, never mind anything else.
That's the thing, I was watching it and I would keep forgetting who was up or who was down because it was just happening so fast and you're kind of looking at it and trying to calculate it in your head.
And it's relentless.
Or can you put down your little thing a bit sooner where it says 23 points so I don't have to sit here and work it out. Yeah, well, the scores were just coming so thick and fast. It was
they just go from end to end, and it happens really quickly in hurling. And I mean, it is more exciting, and there's all the discussion about how the Munster Hurling Championship is so exciting. But I saw somebody pointing out that there was great games taking place and an awful lot of jeopardy in Leinster last weekend as well. The great pity, as we all know, of hurling is that there's not more teams involved and in with a chance. That it's just still that same core of the big sides, and it hasn't really, for all the efforts, it hasn't really caught on outside the big group of whatever, 6 or 8.
Within that 8, there is currently great competition, and that's the reason the crowds are flocking to games. I mean, we mythologise the Munster Championship to the point that aggravates some people, but the games this year have just been off the charts. I mean, watching as a neutral, you're breathless, you're absorbed. The skill levels are just ludicrous. We talk about Leinster. I mean, Wexford's victory last week over Kilkenny, really emotional, a powerhouse display by Lee Chin. Westmeath previously beating Wexford, which is perhaps a sign of advancement. Dublin going 12 up against Galway last week. Galway coming back, and you're wondering, what does this mean for both teams? The narrative in hurling at the moment is all resoundingly positive, and I think Orla has just opened up a piece there that illustrates it, where Tommy Conlon was talking about the week Limerick had last week with Munster, which is the spiritual home, or Limerick rather, the spiritual home of Munster, celebrating on Saturday a victory in Cape Town, and then 44,000 people at the Gaelic grounds the next day in wonderful sunshine. I actually saw a line from Declan Lynch in another part of the forest this morning, where he's talking about a music show and just saying, when the sun shines, basically everything is so much more appealing to the eye. And that was a marvellous day. These days of summer that live with you forever, the sun always seems to shine on those days. And maybe our memory plays tricks on us, but a day like that at the Limerick game last week was just extraordinary.
I think there were a few people in the country who didn't want to be down in Limerick or around Thomond Park and the likes last week. It was just epic to watch from afar, so I can only imagine what it was like to actually be in the middle of it proper. This is the stuff you tell your grandchildren about and annoy them about for years, that you were there on the day.
It's pretty amazing what happened when you look at it, and Tommy summed it all up beautifully there in the piece about how that was Saturday night and Sunday, and he kind of makes a case about how it was Munster who were dominant in people's hearts for a long time in that area, and then as they started to come down in the hierarchy in rugby, that it was Limerick Hurling came there to revive it. And there's a fight for hearts and minds to be had, because 44,000 following them in the Gaelic grounds, that's an awful lot of eyeballs. And you want to pull them back to rugby, and Munster are doing everything that they can to bring them back. But that Limerick team are just amazing to watch. They really are. And as you say, the fact that it was such a sunny day and you're looking at it on TV, it just looked superb. It was one of those days that you really want to be in the crowd.
Yeah, and to have that loyalty as well to the teams, in terms of, it's one thing watching it as a neutral and it's great fun, but if you're there and that's your county and you're supporting them, and things are on the edge in the way that they have been for Limerick over the last couple of days, like even earlier when we were talking about Manchester City and their kind of run of incredible form, I was talking to someone from Limerick just before the season started, and he was like, you hate saying it, but it's losing some of its glow, because you're getting used to it. And he's like, it's not that you would ever wish it away or anything, but it's losing the glow. And I was talking to the same guy after last weekend, and he was like, it's coming back, the glow is coming back, because there's that jeopardy.
You work harder.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeopardy is the word. When you have that risk that it can all be taken away, when suddenly victory is not guaranteed, success is not guaranteed. And the Limerick story this year, where they lose Sean Finn, probably the best defender in the game over the last 3 or 4 years, where Cian Lynch, a 2-time hurler of the year, coming back from injury and not being at that previous level this year, where Gearóid Hegarty for a while was struggling for that form where he dominates and completely takes over a game, where their backs are to the wall and yet they still found a way. That real champion spirit, the essence of greatness, I suppose, is how you perform when things are not going so well. And they were able to find a way, they were able to win, and not just find a way, but do it in absolutely thrilling circumstances. But where we thought the championship was a coronation for Limerick 3 months ago, there's now a real sense of every team remaining that we can be a major factor in this. And that's the storyline you want coming into All-Ireland quarterfinals and stuff like that.
Especially when we look at the GA, and it's at a very different stage at the moment, the football side of things, where you have those 5, 6, maybe even more teams who could possibly win it. Even earlier before you guys came on, myself, John and Aidan were trying to work out who would be our tips to win the All-Ireland, and that's great. It's good to have that open play, but also it's frustrating, I suppose, at this stage where you still feel like once it actually gets down to it, there's going to be the teams that you expect to pull away. And I mean, it's been great watching the hurling the last couple of weeks and seeing a team like Limerick struggle, and see how like John Kiley deals with the media pressure around that, the local pressure. He has said pretty consistently since the start of the season, nothing is guaranteed. I don't understand why people keep telling us it is. And then when talking about Limerick, you look at, like, say, Munster's victory and how their year changed. I spent the first half of this year talking about how terrible they were and how this could be the worst season ever for them, absolute disaster. And then they come out with a trophy, and Leinster come out with absolutely nothing.
Well, that is the thing. They measure each other. Munster and Leinster measure themselves relative to each other, and anybody suggesting a month ago that Leinster would finish the season trophyless, and Munster, who went to South Africa, was it in early April, looking like they were fighting for their life in terms of qualifying for Europe next season. It was a huge crisis potentially engulfing, and the response, to be fair, has been absolutely fantastic. But Leinster, who've been by far the leaders in excellence, who have brought through all of these great players, who backbone a Grand Slam winning team, who have in Leo Cullen, I think, a really immense leader, a very, very bright guy, but doesn't get so emotionally involved that he's not able to think coldly, or that he's not able to, well, I suppose basically he always knows danger is afoot, but he reacts very well to that.
I'm actually just getting through in my ear that we have a little halftime report coming through from Colin Boyle that we need to throw to. So Mayo are leading Louth there 7 points to 4 at McHale Park. Colin Boyle is speaking to our reporter Oisin Langan there. We will be back after this and some ads.
Welcome back to Hastings Insurance McHale Park. We're at half-time in this All-Ireland Series Group 1 Round 2 encounter. Mayo lead by 3, 7 points to 4. Mayo would have wanted a strong start to this one, and they got one. They were 3 points to no score up, but they failed to score for the next 12 minutes. In that time, they did have a goal chance, James Callip making a good save. In between time, Louth climbed their way back into the match. Sam Mulroy has popped over a couple of frees. Kieran Downey has scored a mark. Conor Grimes has scored a point as well. He's had 3 or 4 shots. That was the only one that was successful for Mayo. Jack Carney has got a couple. Ryan O'Donoghue who scored a free and one from play. Jordan Flynn, Aidan O'Shea, and goalkeeper Colin Reap also on the score sheet, along with Stephen Cohen. The scores from Reap, Cohen and O'Shea all from frees. Former Mayo footballer Colin Boyle is watching this one with me. Colin, is pedestrian the word to use so far?
Yeah, you would say so. Very, very pedestrian. A real lack of energy to the play, and the crowd here in McHale Park is very, very dead. Slow patches of play, but that's just the way I suppose Louth have set up here today. They're trying to frustrate Mayo, and in fairness to them, they are doing that. You mentioned about the start Mayo got, like Kevin McStay were really happy with that. They came out of the blocks, won the throw in, got a score straight away, won the next couple of Louth kickouts, and they're 3 up in the first 5 minutes, and they only score 4 points in the next 32-33 minutes of that half, because Louth literally set their 14-50 bodies inside that half, and Mayo found it really, really hard to break it down. I think they've only got 3 scores from play. they've struggled really to navigate and get shots off. It's not like they've had loads of shots. I think they've only had 9 or 10 shots, 2 wides and 1 drop short, so they're finding it hard to get their shooters into the shooting positions. In fairness to Louth, they're defending really well. They're staying in this game. Mayo have had a goal chance that really they should have done better on. David McBreen takes a shot on his left foot that he really should be hand passing across to James Carr to tap in. So look, overall Louth will be really, really happy. Mickey Hart will be really, really happy with that half, especially after the start they got. I think for them there, you mentioned Conor Grimes, he's been really good. He's gotten an awful lot of ball. Anthony Williams and Dolan McKinney coming from back there have caused all types of problems as well. So Louth will be happy they're still in this game, but Kevin McStay will be looking for a lot more from Mayo in the second half.
Okay, for now, Colin Boyle, thank you very much. In the heat of Castlebar at half time, it's Mayo 7 points, Louth 4 points.
Yeah, so that was Colin Boyle there, and we will be hearing a bit more from him when that game finishes up. That was 7 points to 4 to Mayo at half time. Also coming up a little bit later on, we will be chatting to Shane Kern ahead of their game, Roscommon's game against Sligo, and we will have Keith Tracy in to review a bit more of the FA Cup final. That was obviously one more step closer to the treble for Manchester City. Coming up a little bit later on, Nathan Murphy will also be swapping out for me, so he'll be taking you through all the final news stories of the day. And before that, we will also have the very end of our Sunday paper review, which there's some great papers or great stories in the papers today, so definitely do get out and buy one if you haven't already. Now, coming up, we have ads and news, and then we will be back with Orla and Roy in studio.
The Sunday papers on Off the Ball. Get real-time updates at News Talk FM on Twitter and stay informed. News Talk. Conversation that counts.
At Cupra, we believe in the power of impulse. Cupra Born's eBoost function allows you to tap exhilarating performance on instinct. But Cupra also believes in looking after our tribe. So when you order a Cupra Born before June 30th, we will add €2,000 on top of your €5,000 SEAI government grant. That's a €7,000 boost towards your new Cupra Born. So follow your impulse. Search Cupra Official. Terms and conditions apply.
VHI Multi-Trip Travel Insurance is your passport to peace of mind. Lost baggage in Beijing? Hotel cancellation in Cavan? Sprained ankle in Auckland? Wherever you go, you're covered from only €59 a year. Buy VHI Multi-Trip online today. Terms and conditions apply. Prices for adults 18 to 64. VHI Healthcare DAC trading as VHI Healthcare is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland and is tied to Collins and Insurance Europe Limited for VHI Multi-Trip Travel Insurance.
Cara's decking's a mess. She's hosting a barbecue, but everyone's terrified of that slippery deck of doom. If only she knew about Runseal Ultimate Protection Decking Stain. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It makes your deck slip and stain resistant. Take note, Cara. It protects from knocks and scuffs. And it's rainproof in 90 minutes. But she's done nothing about her deck, all because she expects things in life to let her down. Dust sheets, bus timetables, self-service tills. So Cara, just remember, we won't let you down. Runseal does exactly what it says on the tin.
This week at Power City, check out our mega deals on Bosch, Neff, Dyson, Samsung and LG. For more information, go online to powercity.ie or call in store today.
With soaring energy costs, there's never been a better time to install an Energlaze solar electric system from Huawei. It will help power your home with clean, green, renewable energy, dramatically reduce energy bills and your carbon footprint. Future-proof your home with the power of Huawei Fusion Solar from Energlaze. And now you can save even more with up to €2,400 in grants, zero VAT, and you can get paid for any extra electricity you don't use. Take the first step today. Visit energlaze.ie towards a greener, warmer home every step of the way.
News Exchange, the global news conference, is coming to Dublin on June 19th and 20th. Speakers include Miriam O'Callaghan and David McCullough, the BBC's Lise Doucette and Laura Koonsberg. War reporter John Sweeney on Ukraine and CNN's John King join them to discuss the challenges faced by journalism in 2023. War, fake news and the big social and political issues. Limited discount tickets available now. Enter the code RAD23 at newsexchange.org. That's RAD23 at newsexchange.org.
On 106 to 108 FM, on the News Talk app, powered by Go Loud and smart speakers. This is News Talk.
It's 3 o'clock. I'm Lindsay Dolan. Good afternoon. A government TD admits it was wrong to reintroduce excise duty on fuel this week. The price of diesel at the pump rose by 5 cents on Thursday, with petrol increasing by 6. Mayor Fine Gael TD Michael Ring said the government made the wrong decision.
And I felt this week we should not have put up the fuel. I felt the fuel should have been kept down. It's only putting further pressure on people. Every family home in this country needs their car, particularly in rural Ireland. They do need their cars. We don't have the infrastructure they have in Dublin. We don't have the Louth. We don't have the Dublin bus. We're depending on our cars. And when you hit people at the pumps, you hit people in the pockets.
Now, this bank holiday weekend has been the busiest of the year to date at Dublin Airport. However, parking remains a major issue, with all airport car parks completely booked out at the weekend. The DAA is attempting to purchase a now defunct car park on the Swords Road, which would add 6,000 spaces. Media Relations Manager Graham McQueen said if the sale goes through, the DAA can have the car park open in 1 to 2 weeks.
We're going through that process with the Competition Authority at the moment. They've asked us for additional information and given us a deadline to get back with that information. We're working through that as quick as we can. It's an extensive amount of information that they're looking for. If we got the keys today, though, we could get it open within 1 to 2 weeks, and we'd be hopeful that deal gets approval, and then we could get those car parking spaces back into action.
India's railway minister says signal failure is most likely what caused the train to change tracks in errors, resulting in the country's deadliest rail crash in decades. At least 275 people were killed in the accident. A further 1,200 people were injured. Some families are still searching for their loved ones. Bernachi Nayak is a social worker and said volunteers are amongst those helping out.
Definitely, it's a challenging time now. There's lots of doctors, students are working.
And finally, the VHI Women's Mini Marathon has been won by Donegal native Nikita Burke in a time of 34.27 minutes this afternoon in Dublin. The run has raised over €266 million for charities since its inception. And that's your news for now.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Proposing this summer, get hitched in Paris, Lisbon or Rome with Ryanair's low-fare flights.
Mostly dry and sunny, with just a slight chance of an isolated shower developing in Ulster. Highs of 20 to 25 degrees, generally slightly cooler along eastern and northern coasts. Now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Hello and welcome back to Off the Ball. Kathleen McNamee here, and we are still on our Sunday paper review because there's just so much good content out there. Irish journalism is well and truly doing very, very well, and I'm saying that purely in a written capacity and not praising myself as now working in broadcast media, I swear. We were talking a little bit about it just before we went to the ad break and the news there, but the success that Munster had this season and that great piece about the joy that has been down in Limerick over the last week between Limerick and then also that URC trophy, which looks like it comes off a spaceship. Every time I see it, I'm like, it's like the aliens lost a little bit of one of their spaceships and some rugby person picked it up and they're like, this would make a great trophy.
It's funny, one of the joys of going to a game in Kilkenny is meeting up with Mick Galway, and I was with him for a while yesterday, and I was asking him, as a Munster legend and sort of as a guy who got so much joy out of 06 and 08 just after his retirement when they conquered Europe twice, how much last week meant to him, and he was absolutely elated to see that spaceship shaped trophy come back. He thinks in some ways it's almost as big as when they conquered Europe, because they've been in such a valley period watching Leinster dominate, that to make that statement, I think it was Tommy Conlon talked this morning about Keith Earls never having won a Heineken Cup, and now to win this, he's actually won a trophy in Limerick. Keith Earls in his autobiography talks about really admiring the Limerick hurlers and their brilliant athleticism, and also envying them to see them in their hometown being able to lift a trophy. So I think as a launch pad for a second coming of Munster as a major force, there's nothing like victory to get people back out. I know Orla was talking earlier about Naas Rugby Club outside to me, and the amount of kids that they have there every week, because they're seeing Ireland win Grand Slams, and victory is the greatest recruiting agent of all in any sport, I think.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. That's how you'll get the kids out there, and you'll see it now. It'll kick on again in Munster. And what's lovely about Munster is finally this season, to a large degree, we've seen the homegrown players and the young guys being given the chance and being given the opportunity. There's players from West Cork and, you know, outside the traditional areas of, you know, Limerick and Cork City, and that'll definitely be a springboard for them. But Brendan Fanning he kind of charts the road to recovery for Munster, about how they came back to this position because they had been, you know, talking about Rob Penny and Tony McGahan in those years where you were wondering where the heck they were going and what was happening with them, and it seemed to take so much longer. And you look back now and how long ago it was that they won in 2011, and it's taken them a long time to come around. But definitely Graham Rowntree, and, you know, there's a lot of credit given across papers to Prendergast and Leamy and their roles in what's happening down in Munster, and that's that real Munster thing of, you know, just knowing what the province are about and what it means to them, and they're guys who can instill that in the players that are there. And the one interesting thing in Bernard Jackman's piece, he talks about how it was a shock to hear that Dan Sheehan and Hugo Keenan saying in the build up to the final that they haven't won a medal with Leinster, which is interesting. And you kind of look at that and think, well, I hope they're not like Keith Earls in a few more years' time, you know, waiting. I don't think they will be. I think, like, as Bernard makes the point, that Jacques Nienaber coming in is something that Leinster really need into the team, and that might make the difference for next year. But the discussion of how Leinster did, is Shane McGrath touches on it as well, and what that means for Ireland and what it means for Ireland's hopes going into the World Cup. And with the World Cup squad being released this week, and, you know, we're starting the countdown to that now. I think Brendan pointed out that it's 100 days now, so, you know, we'll be rolling straight from the Women's World Cup into the Rugby World Cup.
Oh, even I was looking at the date today, 4th, and I think I fly out to Australia on July 9th, and I was like, how is it come around so quickly? And then we were talking about Rugby World Cup fixtures as well, and I was like, how are they happening so quickly? These things were years away, and now they're right on our door.
It's a relentless sprint this summer. Like, it's just, you know, you're going to be championship is going to roll into the World Cup. Like, that first fixture is July 20, isn't it? You know, and you're going to have that just dominating things for a few weeks, and then you'll in the meantime, in August, like, Ireland are going to be building up to the Rugby World Cup, and, you know, what the hopes are for that. Rory Keane touches on it, talking about it in the Mail, about, like, how there's been continual hype leading up to every World Cup, and belief about where we are, and then meeting with a crushing reality of where we actually are when we get to the World Cups. And, you know, the hope is that's not going to happen this time around. But Shane McGrath touches on the point of whether the power game is displayed against Leinster, whether that has an impact on Ireland, and is it something that Ireland need to worry about? But I think one of the big differences is that you know, you have people coming in who impact the game very differently for Ireland, and you'll have Johnny Sexton back, but one man who I think gets or deserves a lot more credit is Peter O'Mahony. I think his leadership skills and his sort of experience and nous on the pitch just make a huge difference when it comes to Ireland.
I think in the Indo yesterday, or during the week, Rory O'Connor gave Peter his Irish Rugby Player of the Year. He said there are compelling claims for people like Kylan Doris, for Mac Hansen, for Josh van der Fleer, but O'Mahony is just one of these people that, you know, you'd love to go to war behind.
Absolutely.
You just, I know we can sometimes resort to cliche, but even when you see him singing the national anthem, it stirs something in you, and you feel, I can really relate to this guy. And he's not one of these fantastically gifted natural talents. He's a guy who's had to scrap and fight, who's had to give everything of himself every time he performs to be of value to the teams that he performs with, in, I suppose, a Roy Keane style way. And I think as supporters, we relate to people like that because they are not born with all the talents, but they've made themselves indispensable. They've made themselves leaders by virtue of the type of people they are, the depth of their character as well as their athletic gifts. They're the sort of people that I really get a kick out of watching in sport, and I agree entirely. His value as a leader to any team he's involved with is immense.
Yeah, you'd wonder if Leinster had a player of his style, would that have helped them over the line against La Rochelle? Because I think the thing about Peter O'Mahony is it's not always beautiful to watch, or it's not always, it's not him taking something beautifully cleanly. It's the passion, it's the grit, it's the fight, it's the seeing him down in the middle of something getting absolutely stuck in and roaring whenever his head pops back up, because he knows he's gotten that important bit of space, or he's gotten that important gain for Ireland.
Yeah. And he's the type of person you can see, if a team concedes a try, he's the man who's going to be there dragging people in and knocking heads together and saying, right, here's what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And he's the type of person who just takes charge. He's that leader who will take control. And maybe that is to a degree what Leinster were lacking. There could have been cooler heads, there could have been decisions made differently towards the end of that game that would have changed things. Conor Murray's another example of that. People point out that maybe if Conor Murray was there steering that rather than Gibson Park, that Conor Murray would have forced Ross Byrne into a position where he was going to take a drop goal, or it's just, they're the additions that make Ireland something more than Leinster, and they're the very important ones that are going to be different. They're going to make the difference.
There's a really interesting line again on Bernard Jackman, who's always very, very good and very perceptive, talking about that very factor, and he's talking about Sexton's retirement leaving a massive void, particularly for Leinster, but also for Ireland. And he said the lack of obvious leaders wasn't something that jumped out at me when I looked at the Leinster squad, even with Sexton injured. But I was interested to hear Dan Levy say in a podcast a few weeks ago that a lot of the boys are very quiet on and off the field. Being quiet doesn't make you a bad leader, but certainly the way the team reacted to pressure in the last 4 knockout games is a concern. The Hugo Keenan thing really jumped out at me. Here's this guy who's been at the very top of his game for the last 3-4 years. He's been an extraordinary addition to both Leinster and Ireland. And we just have this perception of Leinster as this trophy machine. And yet, deep into his 20s, he's trophyless. And it brings home those narrow divides that are required to get a team over the line. Ask anybody who have been the dominant Irish rugby team over the last 2, 5, 8 years. Everybody says Leinster. So the 2 years without a trophy actually seems almost like a famine, given their qualities, given their talent, given that they have in every position, both on the field and off the field, they have exceptional people. But it shows with Munster, as we said, what a guy like O'Mahony, and obviously there are so many dimensions. Brendan Fanning piece talks about how was Johan van Graan given a second contract extension offer when they were clearly going nowhere. He talks about how Graham Rowntree struggled at the start of the year, but a key factor was empowering coaches, and particularly the Irish guys came in, Mike Prendergast, Dennis Leamy, and the jobs they have done. And you just feel Munster are going back. We talked about tactical evolution, but certain basic things remain true in a lot of sports, particularly in rugby, and physicality and heart and sense of identity have always been at the core of the Munster story. And I think what they've achieved, those have been fundamentals as much as the tactical stuff that have enabled them get back to where they need to be.
You think even listening to a lot of the players speak after the win in the URC, that was the thing that a lot of them were pointing to. It wasn't necessarily the tactical shifts that happened, or that they were making changes to their diets or the way they trained. I'm sure those things did come, as they naturally do when a new coach comes in. But you got the real sense that they had the legacy of Munster in their hearts, and they had the fight, and that had been restored to the team in a way that just hasn't been there for the last couple of seasons at all.
I think there's probably no team in Irish sport that the connection between audience and team is so fundamental to what they achieve. There was always a sense that Munster were a movement. I remember Keith Wood telling me a long time ago, he was absolutely shattered one day in Thomond Park. He was down on the ground. There was 10 minutes to go. He'd nothing left to give. And he just heard the cries of Munster, Munster. It was almost this primal chant. And it just suffused him with adrenaline that he never expected to have. And that extra man, we can overplay it like we overplay the mythology of the Munster hurling, but the reason these things exist as images is because there's substance to them, I think, and that has been a fundamental part of Munster. And there was a disconnect between fans and team over a number of years. There were falling attendances. There wasn't the same passion at Thomond Park on match days, but that has returned as well, which is great to see.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, just give some quick updates from around the houses. So Mayo are on 9 points, Louth are on 7 points, that's after 46 minutes. Monaghan 13 points to Clare's 111, so that's after 47 minutes. And Clare are the All-Ireland Minor Hurling Championship. Final score there is 222 to Galway's 411. We'll have more updates on the GA throughout the rest of the afternoon as well. One of the other pieces I kind of wanted to highlight was, we were chatting about it a little bit earlier, was Paul Kimmage writing about the interview with David Corkery that was in the Irish Times yesterday.
Yes. Irish Times yesterday with Dennis Welch.
Yeah, a great, really, really insightful piece, and really, I mean, what he's gone through is absolutely horrendous, and you wouldn't wish it on anyone. And it's actually interesting because, like, for a lot of the start of Paul Kimmage's piece, he's actually just quoting word for word what David Corkery has said in the Irish Times piece. But I thought it was interesting. He was talking about, you know, David Corkery was saying that he almost feels like he's been villainized since he brought this up, and that, you know, a lot of people who used to be in his life, especially former players, have just disappeared, even though he's obviously going through some of the toughest times of his life. And I thought Dennis Walsh also brought up Paul Kimmage brought up the interesting question of, you know, a lot of the piece Corkery talked about the different cortisone injections and the painkillers he was taking, and he was like, there's a question to be asked here as well as responsibility in these situations. You know, we're talking about the build up to the World Cup and the excitement, but like, seasons are getting more and more, like, there are more and more games, there are more and more tournaments, there's more expected of players, the players are getting bigger, and there has to be some sort of impact on people's bodies, as much now as there was back when there wasn't even professionalism in the game. And I suppose questions to be asked if this sort of thing is still happening, and what can we do about it, and what can we learn as well from people like David Corkery speaking out. Because you were making the point earlier, Orla, when we were talking about it, that, you know, for a 25-year-old, you might read David Corkery's story, but it's not going to impact you maybe in the same way it would if there was someone standing right in front of you and you could see the impact, and you're still at that age where you have a certain level of, I am invincible.
Absolutely. And like, if you look at, like, we're talking about leading up to the World Cup, I think the players have 3 weeks in between domestic season finishing and then preparation beginning for the World Cup. 3 weeks is not a lot of time for anybody's body to recover from what's gone on for an entire season of domestic rugby before you begin to prepare for that. And that's the point. You know, young men in their 20s, are they going to, you know, read these testimonies and take them in and understand them? And a lot of people in David Corkery's position, and, you know, we've read Steve Thompson and just, you know, the players in England, and so many of them discussing the dreadful things that are happening to them now and the diagnoses they're getting. A lot of them say if they'd known then, and they didn't know then, this was not clear and obvious to people playing rugby then, that these impacts and these concussions could do. I mean, it probably wasn't even called concussion. You know, they didn't. On the head. Yeah, you know, he got a Knox throw bucket of water over him and let him up. Like, it's you know, and you see now the result of that, as David Corkery said, they were the guinea pigs, and we understand it now. But I wonder, do we understand it to the level that a 25-year-old is going to say, well, this is going to impact on me when I'm 50. Maybe this will cause me a problem that I won't be able to play with my kids or pick them up, or, you know, I'll be left with life-changing injuries, be they knee or hip injuries or something like that. And a worse scenario of the early onset dementia or the CTE or all those other dreadful things that people are dealing with now, you know. So I do wonder whether people, as much as somebody will say, if I'd known then what I know now, is that actually the case? Because, you know, there's the bravado of youth and that feeling of invincibility that everybody has, that you kind of think, well, it's not going to happen to me and I'll be okay. And that's so far down the road anyway, it's quite hard to get your head around.
Yeah, and then you look at a case, say, like Siobhan Cadigan in Scotland and everything that she's gone through and that her family are going through now, and that's a very young player and that had serious things going on, and it wasn't recognised, even though, as you said, we're so much more informed now, and we've had these conversations a lot more consistently, say, over in the States with the NFL. And even from that perspective, you kind of want to scream at people and, like, take the piece by Dennis Walsh and just, like, push it into their faces and be like, we don't, you know, the people that we're talking about now as heroes of Irish rugby, we don't want to be sitting in 10 years down the line, or it might not even be that long, that's the thing with a lot of these things, and being like, God, was it all worth it? Because I think as much as we enjoy watching the games, I don't think anyone would say it's worth it.
You can't infuse wisdom into young people in terms of their life experiences oftentimes until they've actually been experienced. I think one of the most concerning parts of the whole story has been the way the response to Corkery speaking, and sort of he's breached some law of omerta, it seems, and has been isolated by former friends as a consequence, which is outrageous when you think about it.
But that's the thing as well. We talk about you can't put that sense into younger people, and sometimes they need to experience it firsthand for themselves. But this isn't just younger people as well. You know, these are big voices in the rugby world and people who do have the power to make changes if they want, and instead it's almost like they're looking at him as if he's weak for the fact that this has happened.
Well, the notion that somebody is weak for talking out, that's the sort of stuff that existed around mental health for an awful lot of years, and which was really, really self-destructive. I think the concern for a lot of people is they understand this is an existential question for rugby, and while huge improvements have and are being made, we're still kind of dancing in the dark in terms of where we'll be in 10, 15 years, because you're only learning from players who are enduring things in the past and how their bodies are responding now. The players of today, in 10 years' time, the party line is that every bit of medical expertise is channeled to make sure they're as safe as possible, and I'm sure to a large degree that is true. But you cannot be involved in car crash situations every day you go to work. Every day may be an exaggeration, but constantly, if you look at the amount of physical battering by these guys who are just such powerful athletes now, and down the line you wonder. So silence is the very worst thing, and criticise someone who has the courage to speak and raise their head above the parapet, that's almost as damning, if not more so, than the actual guinea pig stuff of 15, 20, 25 years ago.
Because the awareness is vital. Like it is that awareness, and you want kids to be aware of it. I was at a kids' school hurling match during the week, and one of the boys wasn't playing, and I asked him, was he okay? You know, he was surprised he wasn't playing, and he said, "Oh, I've a concussion. I was playing football the other day and complete accident, fell and just hit his head."
Yeah. Which
I
happens.
said, well,
like,
how are you feeling?
You know,
and he said, "Oh, I have a headache and I'm not allowed to play sports for 2 weeks, and I can't look at screens and I can't do anything like that." So at least he was aware of what he needs to do. Clearly his parents were aware of it. Whoever was involved in the situation at the time recognised that here's a child who needs to get checked out by a doctor, and that's all to be welcomed. So to damn somebody for coming forward and saying this is what I'm suffering as a result of what is a brain injury, that's what concussion is. It's a brain injury, and it's damage being inflicted on your brain. So to dismiss it is just dreadful.
It doesn't make any sense. And like, we had Eddie Dunbar on the show during the week on Off the Ball AM, and he was talking about the fact he suffered a concussion. Again, just an accident. He fell over the front wheel of his bike, whacked his head, and he was saying himself that he didn't really have that much knowledge of concussion before it happened, and it kept him out for 9 months. And he was like, my mental health was all over the place, you know, because that's obviously one of the things that comes whenever you have it. He's like, I was getting consistent headaches, I couldn't concentrate on anything, I was basically close to giving up cycling, and then eventually went to talk to someone and they were like, have you been tested for a concussion? And he was like, no. Should I have been, or should I have been aware of this? And it's mental that in this day and age we still have sports stars that don't have the resources around them to make sure that they are getting like that proper sort of help, and that there's someone pushing them as well to be like, you need to get this checked out. And it's totally understandable that he didn't realise, because it needs to be talked about more, and it needs to be flagged more, and hopefully, more pieces like this. Dennis Walsh is a great writer and has done a lot of work around this sort of thing. Hopefully we can keep bringing a bit of attention to it, because it could it's already at crisis levels, and it could very easily get even worse as time goes on, which is a very cheery note for me to line up some football scores for everyone if they want to hear about what the latest is from the football championship. So Mayo are 11 points up against Louth. They're 11-8 there, 55 minutes gone. Monaghan 18 points to Clare's 1-14, 53 minutes gone there. Down in Dr. Hyde Park, Roscommon 2 points up against Sligo after 17 minutes. The score there was 4 points to 2. In terms of the Telton Cup, Longford and Carlow is all evens with 5 points to Carlow's 1-2. Wexford 2 points, Leitrim 4 points, Fermanagh 4 points, Antrim 1 point there. And yeah, as we said earlier, Clare are the All-Ireland Minor Hurling Championship winners, so fair play to them. Is there any other stories that particularly caught your eye today, guys?
I think
You're probably going to say the same thing.
Aidan
We're talking
O'Brien.
about Aidan O'Brien. I think that, it deserves comment that it's his ninth derby, and a lot of the discussion in the papers is about, what a feat it is for him to have won 9. I was thinking about this yesterday, like the Aidan O'Brien story itself is extraordinary, and to step back and take a look at the man's career, and I actually went and had a look yesterday at where it started for him in the 90s, and his family as well. Like we all know now that Donegan and Joseph have, launched their own training careers, but his wife Anne-Marie is an extraordinary woman. Anne-Marie Crowley was champion national hunt trainer in her own right. It's extraordinary to think about what they both achieved. Aidan was still being crowned champion national hunt trainer when he had taken over the job on Ballydoyle. Like, he's an extraordinary man, and I find him fascinating. I'd love to hear, I'd love to get, I don't know, maybe Paul Kimmage might be able to get a few things out of him, but somebody to sit down and be able to draw some of the information out of him, I just think what he's doing is astonishing.
The people around him invariably refer to him as a genius, and it's not a word that's used as an exaggeration. Some of us who don't know him as well, it's easy to sort of make a caricature of Aidan, because he's not always as comfortable communicating, and you see him after a race and the first thing you know is he's going to have the phone next to the ear and he talk about the lads in Coolmore. But this guy is an absolute phenomenon. I mean, he's a miracle of longevity. His reign at Ballydoyle, the most high pressurised job in the sport, and in the sporting world it would be up there, is now in its 27th year. We're talking Alex Ferguson duration, during which time he's produced 42 English classic winners. After the race yesterday, he kept talking about the horse Auguste Rodin as being unique, and as Lewis Porteous pointed out in a Racing Post piece this morning, the unique factor in this is Aidan O'Brien. I mean, we use words like horse whisperer, the whole family story. I mean, for Joseph and Donegan both to be champion jockey, Joseph's tall enough to play basketball and he was the champion flat jockey.
Ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, but we sort of like bravado and easy quotes from her sporting heroes. Aidan's at his most comfortable at dawn in the Jeep following these animals, and he can see things that are just, even people who've worked in racing all their lives just can't understand the depth of his connection with these animals. He is no more than Willie Mullins over in National Hunt, an absolute phenomenon, a freak, a genius, and someone we should celebrate to the highest end.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend, even if you're someone who maybe doesn't know all that much about him or hasn't been following his journey, there's a lot of very, very well written pieces that no matter what you get such a sense of the man and the sense of the career and sense of the, as you said, sense of the entire family and what they have achieved. Roy and Orla, thank you very much. This has been very, very enjoyable. It was lovely having you both here to look through the papers.
Thank you.
It's now giving me the impetus that now I want to sit down every single day and just go through every single paper with someone and have a big chat about it, because it's very enjoyable. So we are going to go to a quick ad break now, and then we will be back after that with the latest from Dr. Hyde Park with Shane Curran and more GA reaction.
Off the ball on News Talk. Tom Dunn.
From Blur to Oasis to Damon versus No, Ennio Morricone to Bowie, The National, Stone Roses, Christy Moore, Nina Simone, Lana Del Rey, and all points in between. Music for people who know that music didn't just stop when the Beatles quit. Tom Dunn, The Music Show, Monday to Thursday, 10 to midnight.
On News Talk.
The Harvey Norman Big Sale is now on, with big savings across our massive range of beds, bed linen, and locally made mattresses. Shop our fantastic bundle deals on bed frames, mattresses, and bedside lockers from a low €599. Plus, when you purchase selected mattresses, you'll get up to €200 of bonus bed linen. And with up to 36 months interest-free finance terms available and our best prices guaranteed, in-store and online. Why shop anywhere else? The Harvey Norman Big Sale is now on. Don't miss out.